Okay, I'm William White, music director of Harmonia, composer of Cassandra, which is to be premiered very shortly. And I'm here on Zoom with the co-creator of the Cassandra libretto, Jillian White. So, Jillian, why don't you give us an introduction? Aside from being my cousin, who are you in the world?
Hi, I am a graduate student in the PhD program at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I'm getting my PhD in Latin and Greek literature.
How did
Uh,
you get into classics in the first place?
I took Latin in high school and I really liked it. Did not plan on studying it at this level, but I started taking classes in college and I kind of fell in love.
I guess the next question is, I about a year ago now, probably, I got in touch with you and I told you that I was planning to do this project and I needed somebody to help with the libretto and the language and the Latin of it all and the ancient sources. I don't know, what was your first thought when you heard about this?
I mean, my first thought was, why is it in Latin?
Yes, yes. This is a common question from people who actually know what they're talking about and give it some thought.
My second thought was, I'm glad it's in Latin because I don't know if I can compare it. I don't know how much Greek I can write. Yeah, I was really excited. I was actually taking a class in Greek on the Agamemnon of Aeschylus, which is one of, if not the main source for the Cassandra story. So I was familiar with her from before, obviously, but also reading that treatment of her story and was consistently fascinated or maybe upset by some elements of it.
Yeah, and
Like,
I mean, okay, so I guess at this point it would be a good time to mention the fact that, the task that we set ourselves was basically to create a Greek, or Greco-Roman drama of the story of Cassandra, which doesn't otherwise exist. Cassandra appears as a character in lots of plays and texts and stuff like this, but there is no Aeschylus play of Cassandra or
no.
from anybody else. Our goal was to create like a Frankenstein's monster by taking bits and pieces of other plays and sources and putting it together. So, I mean, I had this idea in mind that this is what we were going to do, but I really needed you to like to be the person who knew about the sources. I didn't really know. So where did you even start? I guess you sort of started with Aeschylus, but maybe not because you wanted to I mean Aeschylus is Greek and you wanted to at least start with the Latin based
Yeah.
sources. So where did you start?
I started with Seneca, who is a Roman playwright, and he actually wrote a lot of his own versions of Greek dramas. So he has his own Agamemnon, which also has a substantial Cassandra section in it, as well as some of his other plays, which have material that are related to the Trojan War cycle. And then I started looking at other places where Cassandra shows up, like the Aeneid, and I think she's in Metamorphoses, Ovid's Metamorphoses, that is, and honestly just searching Cassandra and seeing what else comes up with her story in it.
Yeah, so I mean, you said that your first reaction was to wonder why we would be doing this Greek story in Latin. And I mean, I think I told you at the time there were a few reasons. One is that the last piece that I wrote for my group was in ancient Greek, and I thought that these people are going to behead me if I try that again. The other reason was that this kind of a model for me of this piece is Stravinsky's Oedipus Rex, which he considered doing in ancient Greek too, but he decided on Latin because he said that it was a language that was not dead, but has been turned to stone, something like this. And I guess he just liked the vibes of it.
Mhm.
And I thought, Latin works. But I mean, the reason I'm mentioning this is just that, like, clearly there was a lot of material in
Mhm.
Latin I mean, the grand majority of what we ended up using was original Latin material that was pertaining to Cassandra.
Yeah, no, there's a lot. Actually, a lot of what we consider to be the Greek myths are come from Latin.
Is that
I
right?
mean, yeah. Well, some of them come from Greek, but a lot of them are Ovid. It also kind of is funny because theoretically, Cassandra shouldn't be speaking Greek. or Latin she
Oh
should be
yeah, yeah. Talk
speaking
about this.
some.
Didn't you say that because she was in Troy,
She
right?
was in Troy, so she would have
And
been
she would have
speaking.
been Hittite. Is this correct?
Yeah, I'm not sure, some kind of Persian dialect of whatever the right period was.
Okay, so anyway, you knew your mythology obviously and your lore and stuff like this, and so you found these sources. And what was interesting to me, and actually what sort of was a hang up in terms of getting the piece up and running, was we found a ton of stuff about like the interaction between Cassandra, like leading into the entrance of the Trojan horse, and then the mostly what we found, because it's in the plays about Agamemnon, is when she's taken prisoner and taken to the court of Mycenae or Mycenae, however you want to pronounce it. But you know, we found references to all of these sort of stories about her origin and about how she came by her powers via the god Apollo, but we couldn't find like any real like dialogue or even really sources about that.
Yeah, I don't know why. It's bizarre.
So that meant that I ended up writing this, you know, kind of legendary prehistory based on like, you know, secondary sources that talk about it in English, and you translated it into Latin. So that was your kind of second big task
Yes.
for this project. How was this Latin poetry writing for you?
It was hard. I mean, it was really fun, but there were a lot of like there's some instances where for instance, there's not a real word for princess in Latin for whatever reason, or prince, but I just went with medievally things because that exists in medieval Latin. So I was
Yes,
just kind of making it up as I went along.
yes, my friend Marcello, who's an Italian who grew up going to a liceo classico, you know, and studied Latin and Greek. And when I showed him the libretto, he immediately pinpointed on this. He's like principessa or principissa, you know, in this. And I was like, yeah, my cousin Jillian, she said that that was, you know, medieval Latin, and you know, there was no better word for it. So that's what she went with. He goes, oh yeah, okay, it makes sense.
I mean, yeah, no, I talked to a professor about this word extensively.
Well, the one thing that I noticed about your Latinized, you know, your Latin translations was, and of course I saw this consistently with the original text that you found, was that the Latin is so much more terse. I mean, it seems like you can say so much more
Yeah.
in so fewer words in Latin than you can in you know, modern English.
It's a very compact language. Some of it is because it's a highly inflected language, so you can just change endings on nouns to make things mean different things, as opposed to in English where you have to add lots of prepositions and particles.
Which is fantastic news for a composer, because I mean, like what we always want is you know, minimal words, so that then, you know, the music can sort of fill in all of the space. So that worked out really nicely. So yeah, okay. So you found all of this source material in Latin. You know, we kept these running documents, and you would just like populate it with all of this stuff, and I would find some English you know, the English
Mhm.
translation, and you would give me the Latin, and then I wrote this original English language stuff to kind of fill in the gaps, sort of the frog DNA and the Jurassic Park of this whole thing, and you translated that into Latin. And then the final step was there was just a little bit of extra stuff that I found in English translation that I wanted to use as you know, dialogue in some of these scenes from the Aeschylus version of Agamemnon, which of course was in ancient Greek. And then the last thing that I asked you to do was to translate ancient Greek into classical Latin. And this, I understand, was something new to you. Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, that was wild. Um, so I went and I found the corresponding Greek passages. Luckily, I had read it in a class recently. Otherwise, I might have been drowning because Aeschylus is notoriously very difficult Greek. So what I did is I did first translate it all into my own English to make sure I understood how everything worked.
Hmm.
The grammar did not actually match up as closely as I thought it might
Hmm.
because it was very highly poetic Greek. So I tried to match some of the grammatical concepts as closely as I could because both Greek and Latin share some syntactical and grammatical similarities, but not exactly. That was fun. Also because Aeschylus likes to make up words. There are tons and tons of words in the dictionary that are just made up by him.
Oh, so he's sort of like the Shakespeare of ancient Greece.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, he's the or there it's kind of Greek is sort of similar to German in the way that it makes it molds
Oh.
compound words.
Mhm.
So a lot of his words are just compounds.
So let me ask you this. I mean, aside from the modern stuff that you and I collaborated on, what is the historical time range of like, the lines in our libretto? Like, I'm assuming Aeschylus is the oldest source, and then
Yes.
I mean, I don't know, would Seneca, it's Seneca the Younger who we were using, if I'm not mistaken?
Yes. Yeah, yeah, the most recent source was Claudian,
Hmm.
who did not have anything written about Cassandra, but did have lines that we took because they fit the scene from his epic poem, The Rape of Persephone.
Mhm.
But he was from the fourth and fifth century AD,
And so how far back does the Aeschylus stuff go?
fifth and sixth century Athens. So BC.
So
So
we're
it's about 1,000 years.
so we forced people over a millennia
Yeah.
of time and up to the present day. So it was close to 3 millennia or 2.5 at least. This is a collaborative effort across, hugely distant eras. But I love that kind of stuff. I think that's super
I think
interesting.
it's fun. That's why I felt licensed to use medieval Latin words, because
Yeah, right, exactly. We
why
got to fill in the
not?
gaps. Yeah, or else the whole thing's not going to make sense. And as you say, I mean, you took some lines from plays that had nothing to do with this story. Again, just because we were extracting whatever we could from various sources, mostly in Latin to just tell this story. And if there was a line of dialogue that we needed that wasn't in one of the Cassandra scenes, we just took it from somebody someplace else. And frankly, I mean, I gave lines that were for Clytemnestra's character originally to Cassandra and vice versa.
Yeah.
Just whatever made sense. So I mean, like in the end, I do think that the libretto, in spite of the fact that it's stitched together from all of these ancient sources, it has a 21st century sensibility. Like I don't think that this, I mean, there is some of the weirdness and the estrangement that we would have
Mhm.
from the ancient thinking a little bit, but in a lot of ways, I mean, the way that I organize stuff, it's a more contemporary storytelling.
Yeah.
I feel like the structure of it and sort of, I don't know, just the thought pattern and the morality of it is I think more contemporary, even though I want it to have this slightly ancient feeling. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad that it doesn't quite have the ancient morality because quite frankly, I don't agree with it. So
Yeah, right. We talked about this a lot when we were in the kind of pre-planning stage of it.
yeah, like I mean, Aeschylus, for instance, wild misogynist. It's bad.
Yeah, I mean, even the notion of misogyny would be a very different concept back
Yeah.
then, if it could be said to have existed at all.
Well, interestingly, Euripides, who is another Greek playwright who wrote Medea, was accused of misogyny in the ancient world, which
Really?
is funny because Medea tends to be received as more of like a feminist or, sort of it's very easy to make feminist readings out of that play.
Yeah, I mean, but it's just all to say that like I think that the closer you get to ancient sources, the more you can try to understand them on their own terms and to try to
Yeah.
think like these people. And it's a very foreign method of thought. And,
Yes.
as far as I'm concerned, I mean, it's like, as an artist in the present day, it's like, well, I want to tell my own story. Also, like, when you're confronting, when an audience is being confronted with something new in the theater, there's already so much that they're being asked to receive, especially with like a work of contemporary art music and a theatrical thing with all the singing and sounds and chorus and stuff like that. To try to make it something that they can, narratively and ethically receive. I think that you need to, I don't know, just give them something in a container that they can actually take it in. And of course, but that's just what made this whole project so much more interesting, is like trying to fashion a contemporary story that was both ancient and modern at one. I don't know. I had some idea of what this project was going to be going into it, but of course, you always find out what it really is in the end.
I mean, I also I had no idea what ancient sources. I mean, I knew Seneca,
Hmm.
but aside from that, I didn't really, but I didn't know what the sources were going to be or what they would say.
Was that nerve-wracking for you at all?
A little bit. It's like, I don't know. What if I can't find anything?
Right. Yeah. But no, you found a huge amount. I mean, probably what ended up in the libretto is like, I don't know, maybe half of all the stuff that you actually found. And you also have but I should mention, I mean, you have a musical background
Yes.
yourself. You want to talk
Yeah,
about that? Talk a little bit about your musical background and like what your favorite music is.
I don't play in an ensemble anymore, unfortunately. Should try to do that. I'm just so busy. But I classically trained in violin since I was a child. But yeah, I love classical music. It is most of the music I listen to. My favorite composer is Sibelius.
Still, that's great.
Still, it's never changed.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, I mean, because you and I are like, I don't know, half a generation distance. I mean, I'm my father, my father is the oldest of his siblings, and I'm his eldest child, and your father is the youngest, and you're his only child. And so I don't know, how old are you? Like 25?
24.
24. Okay, so we're 16 years distance. But I remember when you were a teenager finding out that you had gotten really into classical music and that your favorite composer was Sibelius. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Yeah. So across the sort of half generation separating us, that was definitely what brought us together, was this, shared love of classical music. I don't know, anything else that would be of interest to people that you can think of that we should address?
I'm just curious what you were thinking about when you were composing the actual music.
Yeah, I mean, that was a tricky thing because it's like what musical sound world do you want to create for this ancient story that will also sound sort of contemporary? And like I say, it's like, for me, when I'm writing something big like this with a big chorus and soloists and everything, and I'm hoping that it's going to be received by a somewhat large audience, I think that you have to go a little bit populist with the musical
Yeah.
language. I mean, I don't know. If people hear it, they might think that it was like, wow, that's your idea of populism. I guess the things that I had in mind were I wanted definitely to create a sound world for Cassandra's incantations and prophecies. Like I wanted that, some sense of like the voices from the beyond coming into her head and she was channeling them. And then I wanted highly characterized pieces and arias for the other characters. So like Apollo, who is sort of the heel in this show, he gets this like very Batman chords, entrance music, and he has this like minor key aria where he's just so full of himself. I mean, this is some of the ancient source material that you got, like where he's like, I
Yes.
am the giver of, of not life, but of light and all things that are good. And I am worshipped from coast to coast. And I am the bringer of medicine and herbs and stuff like this. Then Agamemnon, who I mean, he killed his daughter in order to like go fight somebody else's war so that Athena would give him the winds. And he's coming back in triumph now. So I wanted to give him really triumphant music. And I got to say that might be some of my favorite stuff, his song that he gets to sing. It's everybody else in this show is such a drip, I mean, they're just constantly complaining about stuff, but he's like got some real chutzpah.
I'm great.
Yeah, yeah. So that was fun. And then Clytemnestra, I mean, I gave her like a Baroque rage aria, which has no business in this piece. I mean, it's just like a total non sequitur, but I couldn't help myself. It was just seemed like such a fun thing to do. So yeah, I mean, these are some of the thoughts that I had. And you know, but I've been thinking for a long time about if I wrote an opera, what kind of opera would I write? And you know, my big complaint about contemporary opera is that like there's no songs in it. There's no tunes. Like, you know, oftentimes the orchestration is really interesting. But the vocal writing is just like, ugh, you just sit there and you think, God, could you give me something that I could hum, you know, when I'm leaving the theater? You know, when I was in college, I was big into the film scores of Bernard Herrmann, who wrote for the soundtracks for Hitchcock films.
Mhm.
And I remember I was just sort of like wandering through the stacks at the University of Chicago where they have this huge collection of scores. And I saw there was Bernard Herrmann on the spine of one of these, and it was Wuthering Heights. And he wrote an opera of Wuthering Heights. And I checked out the score, and I remember I just like played through it and sort of sang through it a little bit. Just like, oh my God, this got to be amazing. Bernard Herrmann wrote an opera. And it was the most disappointing thing I think I've ever read through from a musical perspective. It just was so flat. It didn't have any of the crackle and spark of his film scores. And I remember thinking, you know, if I ever write an opera, it's going to be like the opera that Bernard Herrmann should have written. Now, by the way, that's also basically was Stephen Sondheim's approach to writing Sweeney Todd. Was he wanted it to be a Bernard Herrmann score? He didn't make the connection of the opera, but so to a certain extent, I do think that this piece has a fair amount of Bernard Herrmann with this kind of added intensity of a opera, not his sort of whatever Wuthering Heights was. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we'll see how close I get to it. So far, it's sounding good. I mean, I don't know. I like it. And hopefully, we'll get a nice audience because I did myself and you a favor here by pairing this with Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. That's on the first half of the concert. Well, I mean, it totally has, you know, zero connection. Although the first half of the concert is Candide Overture and Rhapsody in Blue. So if you think about it, this is an all-American program and it's all theatrical minded composers. I mean, obviously Gershwin and Bernstein writing for the Broadway stage, me writing for the Shoreline, Washington stage. And so you can look at it as like a theatrical program with comedy on the first half and tragedy on the second half. So the two sides of the dramatic
Yes, perfect.
masks. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Rhapsody in Blue, that's what's going to get him through the door, you know? And then it's like totally false advertising for what's actually going to happen on the second half of this concert.
I've definitely been lured into premieres that ended up being really interesting and cool by
Mhm.
things in the second half that I wanted to see.
Exactly. That's how we get him. That's what we do. Anyway, Jillian, thank you, of course, obviously for your tremendous work on creating this piece with me, but for joining me today to get the people interested and get them hyped. And yeah, until the next time I see you.
Thank you.
Mhm.